So go-to-market strategy. This is something, obviously, we are used to it from a big pharma or big pharma life. It doesn't go away in the biotech world either. So to kind of discuss that and how to maybe create a more nimble and agile process for the biotech ecosystem, we have the panelists who have had lots of experience in this area. So with Robert Lacaze, Michelle Werner, Gaurav, as well as Fatma joining us. So Fatma, I'll start it off with you. So Fatma right now is the US lead for Novartis. She is, oh, sorry. So she came from Novartis, BioNTech. It has been a long day, BioNTech. But then
BioNTech.
Her big pharma days are from Novartis. And so Fatma, my first question was, how do we take a big pharma GTM and kind of pivot it into a small or mid-sized company like BioNTech?
Okay. I don't know whether we can generalize that big pharma is by default better than small biotechs or the other way around. For me, when I think about big pharma, you mentioned one thing is like our English. Go-to-market is all about getting three things right. The first one is understanding the ecosystem, where we are going to play, and then you understanding the entire patient journey from physician as well as patient perspective, understanding the referral networks, understanding the pain points, challenges, benefits in the system, and potentially how we can address them. So that is the first one. And the second one is the showing the clear value proposition when it comes to go-to-market. What is the gap in treatment paradigm? What is the unmet need? And how you will be able to address them. And the unmet need could be clinical differentiation, right? It could be MOA or strong efficacy, or it could be non-clinical parameters. Through additional value and services that you can bring to your stakeholders and patients. Even more importantly, screening that we have clear value proposition, are we able to communicate that is setting us apart in a very clear, precise, and consistent manner across the functions within the organization, such that your external stakeholders, your partners, your community, anyone that you're engaging with is the same message about our value over and over again. Last piece that I want to really emphasize, because that is the foundational piece for me, is create a chain reaction within the organization. Making sure that instead of creating a culture of silos, it's the different departments, creating an organization where people share the insights freely and everyone is aligned on strategic direction and act with a sense of urgency to bring innovation to the market.
Makes sense. No, thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, so I would say, having spent, roughly 2 decades in big pharma launching a lot of medicines, definitely in retrospect, at the time I felt like we were resource constrained, but boy, did I really not understand that language.
You didn't know anything.
Yeah. When I asked you for budget, Robert, and you gave it to me, that's like my entire company's budget right now. So I think it really puts a different frame of reference in terms of what you may have access to in order to be able to achieve similar things within a biotech setting. What I'd say is very consistent is philosophically, like what Fatma laid out, is absolutely the same. It's no different from a big company to a small company. But I do think that how you go about doing it and doing more with less is absolutely fundamental. And one of the things is also about how early do you really need to be thinking about that commercial mindset in the trajectory of a company. And I'm a very early stage company. It's a little bit different for where Fatma is at BioNTech. I'm preclinical still, so I've got lots of opportunity to think about what commercial considerations might influence the choices that I make in a clinical plan. But, I am also the only employee at the company that has any commercial background. And so, if that sort of those insights are coming into the consideration, it's really coming from me because we don't have the luxury or really the need to have a dedicated commercial person right now. So I guess that's how I would think about it.
Makes sense. Robert?
No, I think your point, Michelle. If you're running a biotech and you come from the academia side or the R&D side, and there's no commercial people on your team, then the question is, at least your company has the luxury of having you there, because as a CEO and launching many compounds on from a big pharma standpoint, you instinctively know some of the things that you need to be looking for. Alan, the same way. And but if you don't have that, then the question becomes, when do you actually begin to try to pull those insights in? And maybe you don't have a full-time person, but there would be, I think, opportunities to have insights gathered from other people, whether it's an agency or a strategy group or somebody to help you kind of think through what some of the commercial issues could be, to make sure that you're being prepared for that. I think also, a difference, again, being in large pharma and then going to the small biotech, the amount of money that one has, when you have an ability to potentially go and raise money based on clinical data, then that sets you up to go through the commercial. I would garner to say, outside of very specific disease areas, more than likely you can't raise enough money to build the infrastructure that you need, nor do you have time to do that. And I think, those strategic questions of, do I partner, do I not partner, do I partner in the U.S. 50-50, or do I do something else? What do I do with Europe or Asia Pac? How do I think about that? How do I create the value? I think all of those are questions that need to be really, I know that's on everybody's mind, is if you got, a drug coming close, but how do you think through that? And do you actually create more value by actually partnering, especially outside the U.S., because to build an infrastructure in Europe, for example, with the access complexities, is very, very difficult. And when do you bring those people on if you try to do it yourself? There are 1 or 2 companies that's done that, but it's been more in the rare disease areas versus oncology. Especially if you're in a neuroscience or one of the big disease areas where you just need lots of resources.
Makes sense. And in terms of some have done it well, others maybe not so much. If I said, is there such a thing is that sometimes it's too early to think about go-to-market? Or is there even such a thing about timing? When does GTM come to your mind? You might be the only one in your organization thinking about it.
Yeah, well, maybe, right? I think my CFO thinks about it too. But yeah, I am already thinking about it. And like I said, we're not even in the clinic yet. But even the small things that I'm choosing to do now, I think is a precursor to an eventual go-to-market strategy. For example, every week I probably have 2 or 3 patients reach out to me and are asking about information about our platform. What are we doing? They have a kid with a nonsense mutation. They're interested in learning more. I answer every single one of those emails myself, right? So I take it very seriously. I get back to that family. I provide a certain amount of information that allows them to remain hopeful, but also to have their expectations, set in terms of the speed at which something might become available for them or for their child. I think that sort of sense of care for the customer and real focus on them and what their need is something that I feel like you can't be too early for that. I mean, so we're doing that now. The same thing as well in terms of how we interact just broadly with advocacy groups that are focused on the different diseases that we intend to include in our first clinical trial. We hear over and over again about the importance of having patients provide input into the way that those studies are designed and what endpoints are chosen and what's going to be meaningful for them. So, a biomarker endpoint in the case of some of our rare diseases may not be the most meaningful, but they might be looking for these other sort of clinical endpoints that could be a good measure of how well a drug is working. And so listening to all of that, even before we have a clinical trial, but taking it all in is something that we do right now. it's not what I would call the conventional go-to-market strategy. Because what would be, okay, you got to map out where the customers are and where the patients are and how many sales reps you're going to need and what kind of, budget you're going to put against different, tactics, to build awareness and conviction and all that important stuff. But these are the kind of things that I think are super important at this stage to really, A, understand the market, and B, start really positioning a clinical program that could effectively deliver against what the patients are anticipating, so that when we have a clinical program that, hopefully it is something that is, meeting their bar. And I think if we can do that in the clinical setting, that will ultimately translate in the commercial setting as well. And, so I think that's the kind of thing that we're doing even right now to make that very real.
In terms of timing, is it ever too early, or are we constantly doing it in the background?
It should always be in the back of your mind. Even as you're thinking about the target product profile, as you're designing, coming out of the preclinical setting. I think, Ann, you spoke to that a little earlier today. And I think it's just really important that, your end goal is always making sure that you're benefiting patients, right? And that's what you want to be able to do. And so I think it's never too early to be thinking about it. The question becomes, when do you actually start making investments behind it? And I think there's also decisions that can be made that are investment agnostic in terms of the way that you think about your even some of your preclinical and translational work that needs to be done. But certainly by the time you're moving into phase 2, even the design of the phase 2, and I'm speaking more specifically oncology here, the design of the phase 2 on the go-to-market has to be part of your equation as you're thinking through that as well. And the last thing I will say is, never been a scientific strategy to meet a commercial need. You always have to follow the science. And if the science doesn't meet the commercial strategy, well, maybe the asset is better with another company or better in somebody else's hands, or you need to change your strategy, one of the two. You should never bend or try to bend the science to meet a commercial strategy.
You bring up a good point about sequencing your decision versus your investments. But are there some decisions once made down the road, it's very difficult to pivot?
Are there decisions that are made? Sure.
Like a clinical trial that now you go.
Yeah. If you're
how to kind of avoid those pitfalls?
First of all, and Michelle can jump in here, but sometimes it depends on which clinical trial you're thinking about, right? Is it phase 3 versus phase 2, et cetera? If it's phase 3 regulatory trial, your endpoints for the regulatory bodies may not be the same endpoints that you need from the access standpoint, right? And so the question is, how do you build that into the trial, or do a parallel trial, or something that will supplement that trial? So when you do get, assuming positive data, then you have the positive data that you need also for the access organization within these countries. And the standard of care in Europe may be different than the standard of care in the U.S., but you try to get a regulatory trial that could be global in nature. Sometimes you need to do 2 trials, but that's very expensive to do that, and it's very hard for a biotech to do that. This is when you have to think about, again, what I said earlier, when do you think about the partnership? Because maybe that is the right thing to do to give a much higher probability of success. So yeah, there are decisions that once they're done, you can't really undo. Michelle, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Robert, and I definitely think that you pulled out some really important sort of ideas, but we also know, like, one of the big killers, right, that can happen is the standard of care just changes while the clinical program is underway. And if you're not looking far enough ahead, not just about where the landscape is today, but where the landscape is going to be in 3 years, 5 years, whatever, fill in the blank number of years that's going to be relevant for you, then you probably have already kind of lost, right? And so I would say that's like one of the really, really key things that any company, big, small, medium size, doesn't matter. You got to be really on top of that, and have the courage to take a very, very critical view of what that future landscape is going to look like, right? I think sometimes it's easy to sort of fall into the trap of, yeah, but our drug is going to be so awesome and we don't have to worry about that, or, that new modality. I don't know, right? Like, just be humble, I'd say, when you think about what the landscape is going to be, and try not to fall into that trap of, not anticipating what will be coming when it might have been staring us in the face.
Yeah, I
This whole
remember
time.
in lung cancer, I think standard of care changed for a massive organization that they had to dispatch all of their
And I mean, I
studies.
can, to that point, I can actually remember a time when we delayed a trial for 4 months
Yeah.
until we saw the competitors' outcome, so we would know how to really design that trial better. And with a delay of 4 months, but being able to appropriately design the trial to make sure that it was going to be relevant when it actually hits was huge, right? So
Makes
that's
sense.
an excellent point, Michelle.
Great example.
Let me just provide a real world example of something that what Gaurav just said. So obviously everybody here knows that I'm a Duchenne mom now. It's not like written into my like Facebook name or my social media profile, but clearly by like searches that I do online, or which Facebook groups I'm a member of or whatever, people, the AI machinery has figured out that, oh, this must be a Duchenne mom. So interestingly enough, it's like, the numbers of targeted ads that I get that are very relevant for my son's diagnosis are actually very pronounced, especially if I'm looking in comparison. There are 2 new therapies that have been approved in the Duchenne space within a relatively short period of time, one of which is very, very good at this. So I see their ads all the time. The other of which has been silent. Now, I know that drug exists because I'm on top of things, but they're really, like, one company is really leveraging this sort of, patient-focused, omni-channel AI stuff like to the max, and the other is not. And so it really makes a difference in terms of eyeballs on your product. And I think that is the way, first of all, that is going to be super important in all rare diseases, because you're not going to have this 100-person sales force, which is typical to launch any oncology medicine, to, speak to the, however many thousands of clinicians. We're talking about few clinicians that treat all the patients, and those patients are going to be everywhere and anywhere. And so you really have to think very differently about how you're going to get to them. At least in the United States, where you can do direct-to-patient advertising, there might be more opportunities than perhaps in other countries where you may have to be more creative and go through advocacy groups and things like that, of course. But I do think that is going to be far, 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 far more important than the conventional strategies that, honestly, that I launched every single one of the drugs that I launched with.
Robert, you had an earlier comment.
No, I was just picking up on some of the go-to-market strategy. Some of the other functions that can easily be overlooked is manufacturing. And, obviously we all know what the manufacturing issues have been in cell therapy, but on the radiopharmaceutical side, it's just as important that, the distribution channels and all are well laid out, which goes all the way back to, who do you partner with even to make your clinical supply. So when you're saying, how early should you be thinking about commercial, another space is in the clinical supply area that then translates into commercial supply, and having the right people or the right companies that can actually scale up, but also have the pull through and making sure that you don't run short. And so there's a whole ecosystem just around manufacturing that has to be thought through, not just from a manufacturing regulatory standpoint, but also from a commercial standpoint.
In the world of thinking local and acting global, or vice versa, obviously, as a small biotech leader, it's very difficult for you to now think beyond your immediate approval in the region you're in, let alone thinking about regulatory bodies as well as pair bodies in top 5 European countries. How to make that balance? I go with Michelle, then Robert and Gaurav. What are your thoughts?
I mean, we still do that, actually. I mean, we're a tiny company that's planning our first clinical program. We are thinking globally. Maybe that's also, again, a byproduct of being in rare diseases. We know our clinical trials will have to be global in nature. That's just the way it's going to be. You can't do a US only. You can't do a France only. I mean, there's no one country, right, that's going to be able to recruit for the clinical program. So we're already doing that. Now, if you're not in rare diseases or if you're not in these kind of like, subpopulations of rare populations sort of don't have that constraint, I still think it's really critical. I mean, but there are also things, I mean, you can't do everything and you do have to make choices and you do have to prioritize. I do think that, what Robert has said a couple of times now in terms of what you want to be partnering in to bring that expertise is absolutely a great strategy. But I think that if you're not thinking globally from the beginning, you're either missing out on setting yourself up for success for a partnering strategy or for your own launch strategy. And so at least do a bit of homework, especially when it comes from a payer perspective, or as early as you possibly can.
Yes, is good.
Yeah.
Maybe in the same vein, I can ask you a question like how to bring your cross-functional teams on board, because these are scientists, these are bench scientists. Their life is totally different than you get excited about a DTC campaign or not so excited about a DTC campaign. How do you bring them along to make it understandable that, okay, this is also important as part of the drug development?
So I actually, when I took this job, I mean, this was my first biotech role after being in pharma for a number of years. And, to join an early stage company like the one that Alterna is today, I definitely asked myself the question, like, am I the right person? Do I have the right skill sets? I've never led a team of pure scientists before. Like, this is, right? I mean, I had a lot of imposter syndrome going on there in the first few months. But what I realized is actually, a lot of the role that I bring is to provide that long-term perspective, because we have incredible scientists at Alterna, many of which have just come right out of academia, finished their PhD, and are like super jazzed about the ribosome and wanted to do something with the ribosome and came to Alterna for that. Well, that's all well and good, but giving them the context of why the ribosome is so cool and how it's going to have an impact down the road, I really feel is like that's what I've brought to the organization, and sort of having them, like, being able to help them see that science is cool and we should do science because it's cool, but we have to do science also for with an impact in mind, and to be able to describe what that long-term plan is and why how all of these things, whether it's you're working in the lab doing a Western blot, or perhaps you're somebody who's coming in, a little bit later to do some analytics on a certain, patient population or indication, like all of that, those people have different roles, but it's all sort of driving towards the one same mission that we have at the end of the day, which is to fundamentally transform clinical practice for a bunch of different patients or a bunch of different people at the end of the day. So I think that there's that's our role as leaders, and to really help them see that no matter what it is that they're doing, how it really fits into the big picture and gets us to that goal together.
Yeah, I think I think it's very important that you bring them along, because at some point in time there may be trade-offs around resources, and resources begin to shift from the scientists to the commercial organization. And that happens even in big pharma. And I saw that as well. We've all seen that. Especially if you have multiple drugs that you're launching, somebody's got to pay for that. And there's trade-off in the resources that have to be sometimes reallocated. However, if the organization has the right understanding of the vision, the mission, and what you're actually trying to do, and knowing that it's ebbs and flows of resources, and that eventually the drug is actually going to be bringing in more resources so they can do even more science, having them understand that cycle and that big picture is extremely important. It's just keeping everybody on board. And I think the other thing, and this is so cliche, but it is really important that the scientists see the patients that they're going to be impacting. And I've seen it when bringing some patients. I mean, I've had scientists. I've been here for 20 years. I've never seen a patient. This is the first time that I actually talked to a patient that my drug actually is benefiting. And that shouldn't be. They should get up every morning, not just thinking about the cool science, but how this cool science is going to help somebody. And that I think that also gives motivation to move faster, but also helps to understand that when some resource trade-offs have to be made, it's being made for the betterment of the patient.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful. And so in spring, when we revisit, maybe we'll double click into the go-to-market, and hopefully we don't give you an answer that AI can take it over. So not yet. So thank you, panel. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Giovanni Abadassa for the next panel. And I think he has Lisa and Christine in the room as well. Thank you, guys.